Ever chased a ghost story into the dark, thinking it's just a game, only to feel the air turn cold with something real? Or heard a scream that wasn't human, echoing where no one should be? Maybe you've carried a secret so heavy it haunts you decades later. If that's ever kept you awake, this tale will sink deep. Hold tight, because what I'm about to tell you might make you rethink wandering too far from home.
Hello, Night Owls. I am Dusky Nights, and I bring you real-life horror stories that will help you sleep, or maybe keep you awake. But before we start, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it right now? Also, do not forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel.
In 1988, I was 13, stuck in Canaan, a small Louisiana town where church ruled, and the 80s crime panic kept kids like me indoors. Halloween was my first taste of freedom. Mom let me out till midnight with friends, trusting Caleb, my buddy Jake's older brother, to watch us. Caleb was 16, a star athlete, with a Bible verse smile adults loved, but he scared us younger kids, always looming like he owned the street. That night, 6 of us, me, Jake, our friend Nate, Nate's little brother Timmy, and 2 others from school, met in Jake's garage, sneaking half of a Nightmare on Elm Street on a fuzzy VHS, laughing to hide our nerves. I went as a ninja, black hoodie and plastic sword. Jake was a pirate, eye patch slipping off. Timmy, barely 7, wore a dinosaur onesie, tail dragging. Caleb burst in, killing our giggles, and herded us out to trick or treat, his flashlight cutting the dark. Canaan's houses glowed with jack-o'-lanterns, kids swarming. But by 10:30 our bags were heavy with candy, and the streets quieted. The others, Tommy and Will, split for home, leaving 4 of us with Caleb. He didn't head back to the lights like I expected. Instead, he let us pass the last cul-de-sac, where sidewalks faded and pines gave way to marsh. The air turned thick, smelling of mud and decay. Bullfrogs croaking somewhere deep. Jake whispered, "Where's he going?" I shrugged, sugar buzz fading, my sneakers crunching leaves. Canaan's bayou wasn't a place for kids, not at night. But Caleb's grin said this was no accident. He was taking us on an urban legend hunt, and I didn't know if I was excited or scared. We stopped at a clearing by the water, cypress roots twisting up like benches. Caleb sat us down, his eyes glinting, as he pulled a cigarette, stolen probably, and lit it, smoke curling in Timmy's face. "Time for a story," he said, voice low, like he'd planned this. He told us about Rawhide, Canaan's ghost tale, one I'd heard in whispers, but never full. Born in the 50s, Rawhide was cursed, skin like cracked leather, eyes small and yellow, teeth sharp from the womb. His dad, a preacher, called him a demon, punishment for old sins, and dumped him in the swamp to die, ignoring his wife's cries. A hermit woman, half mad, heard the baby's wails from her rotting shack and raised him, feeding him frogs and minnows. Rawhide grew fast, silent, no words, just hunger. By 12 he was near 7 feet, sneaking into Canaan, stealing dogs, then cats. Then, by the 60s, kids. A girl vanished chasing fireflies. A boy was gone from his yard. Folks blamed gators, killed dozens, but Rawhide kept hunting, slipping into homes, nails clicking on windows. Caleb leaned in, voice dropping. He lives in the bayou still, waiting for kids dumb enough to wander. Timmy shivered, dinosaur tail tucked tight. I'd heard Rawhide's name before, playground taunts. He'll get you. But this felt real, the swamp breathing around us. Jake nudged me, half smirking, but his eyes were wide. Caleb stubbed his cigarette, grinning. "Want to find him?" My heart jumped, half thrilled, half sick. The swamp terror already creeping in. I should have said no, but I was 13, dumb with dreams of adventure, hooked on movies where kids faced monsters and won. "Let's do it," I blurted, and Caleb clapped my shoulder too hard, rallying the others. Jake nodded, caught in the moment. Nate followed, dragging Timmy, who clutched his candy bag like a shield. We waded into the bayou, flashlights bouncing off cypress knees, mud sucking our shoes. The air buzzed, crickets, frogs, water lapping, drowning our whispers. Caleb led, fearless, pointing at shadows, saying, "There, you see him?" My ninja sword felt useless, plastic bending as I swung at vines. We stuck to dry patches, but water seeped into my socks, cold and gritty. Jake and I lagged, joking to stay brave, but Timmy's whimpers cut through. Nate hissing, "Shut up, you're fine." After 10 minutes, Caleb froze, hand up, his beam catching ripples on the bank. "Rawhide," he whispered, eyes gleaming. We laughed, nervous, thinking he was messing, until he grabbed Timmy's arm. "He loves the little ones," Caleb said, pushing him forward. Nate laughed, cruel, and I joined in, chanting, "Go, Timmy, check it," not meaning it, just caught in the pack. Timmy stumbled, onesie muddy, eyes wet, pleading, "Stop it!" I yelled, "There he is!" A dumb joke, my voice cracking. Then the water exploded, a black shape lunging, jaws snapping Timmy's leg. He screamed, high and raw, as it yanked him under. The lost child gone in a heartbeat. We froze, flashlights shaking, Timmy's cry echoing as water churned red. Nate lunged, splashing, screaming his brother's name. But Jake and I grabbed him, pulling him back. The thing rolled. A gator, had to be. Its tail thrashing, Timmy's onesie flashing once, twice, then gone. Bubbles broke the surface, then nothing. The bayou swallowing him whole. Nate fell, sobbing, mud coating his jeans. I couldn't breathe, my chest tight. The world too quiet except for our gasps. Caleb turned, face blank, and walked away, not looking back. Jake and I hauled Nate up, his fists pounding my arm, crying, "Why'd you push him?" I didn't answer, couldn't, my throat locked. We followed Caleb, reeds snagging us, the trail back to Canaan endless. At the road, Caleb spun, eyes hard. Nobody says a word. Got it? Jake nodded, pale. I stared at my shoes, Timmy's scream looping in my head. Nate choked, tears falling. But Caleb gripped his shoulder, whispering something I couldn't hear. Nate went quiet, broken, and we split. Me to my house, the others gone. Mom met me at the door, 12:20 a.m., her face soft with worry. "You okay, Sam?" I mumbled, tired. And she let me pass, missing the mud, the shakes. In bed, I cried, silent, hearing sirens wail, probably Nate's parents, calling for Timmy, starting the haunted guilt that'd never leave. Morning came, gray and heavy. Mom sat on my bed, voice low. "Timmy's missing, honey. Do you know anything?" I lied. "No." My voice thin, and she hugged me. Her warmth burning my lie deeper. Canaan searched, cops, volunteers, boats, but found nothing. No onesie, no bones. Nate's family cracked. His mom stopped leaving the house. His dad drank. I saw Nate at school once, eyes hollow, avoiding me. Jake stayed my friend, but we never talked about it like silence could erase it. Caleb moved away at 18, college or something, and I heard he became a cop, ironic and cold. I left Canaan at 20, chasing a tech job in New Orleans, running from the bayou's pull. Last month, Mom died, cancer, fast, and I went back for the funeral, staying with my sister Ellie, her kids climbing over me, unaware of my ghosts. Canaan hadn't changed, same churches, same muddy streets, but the swamp felt closer, its smell in the air. At a corner store I ran into Nate, older, thinner, restocking shelves, his smile faint. "Sam," he said, voice rough. And we talked. Weather, jobs, nothing real. His eyes held the same weight mine did. Timmy's absence a shadow between us. I didn't ask what he told his parents. Didn't need to. We parted, promising coffee, knowing we wouldn't. The bayou nightmare still lived in us, unspoken but heavy. I told Ellie's kids about Rawhide, not Caleb's version, but enough to scare them from the swamp. "Monsters don't need names," I said, watching their wide eyes, hoping they'd listen. "Gators took Timmy. I'm sure of it. Their jaws too real for legends. But sometimes, at night, I wonder. Canaan's missing kids, more than most towns, stretch back decades, names fading like ripples. Was it all teeth and hunger? Or something older waiting in the murk? I'll never hunt it again, never step past the streetlights. This is my confession, typed out to shed the weight, to warn anyone listening, don't chase stories where the water's black and still. Don't laugh when someone screams. "3 years ago, my friends and I made an unusual decision. We'd go camping for the weekend. It was a plan that somehow worked. even though our group typically struggled with planning anything in advance. For some reason, when we planned on the fly, things always fell into place. But this time we somehow managed to make it happen. Our parents all agreed, and no one had any games, commitments, or schoolwork standing in the way. So, Friday evening came around, and everyone was excited. Some of my friends packed tents and fire-starting gear, while others made sure to bring safety equipment, just in case. We were all ready for the outdoors. But the catch? We had to hike a trail to reach the campsite. I was the last to start the hike since I had work that evening. I finished up around 8:30 p.m. and arrived at the trailhead by 8:50. The hike itself was supposed to take about an hour at most. And this wasn't just any hike. I lived in Colorado, so wild animals were a real concern. But little did I know, wildlife would be the least of my worries that night. As I started walking along the trail, my mind raced. I've always been an overthinker, and my thoughts quickly spiraled. What if a bear comes out of nowhere? What if I run out of snacks and my blood sugar drops? What if someone's watching me from behind the trees? The fear only grew as I continued walking, but eventually the paranoia started to fade, replaced by the music playing through my headphones. I tried to focus on it, but before long I noticed something odd. My blood sugar was starting to dip. I pulled over to the side of the trail for a quick snack. I've been a type 1 diabetic since I was a baby, so managing my blood sugar was always a part of my life. I didn't really mind it anymore. It was just something I'd always dealt with. Sometimes I wondered what life would be like without it, but it felt like a part of me. I didn't know what normal was, and I didn't need to. But I always found myself sneaking sweets, because why not? As I finished my snack, I felt better and stood up, continuing my hike. But something was wrong. I felt off. My surroundings seemed unfamiliar, like the forest had shifted somehow. I pulled out my map and quickly realized that I'd taken a wrong turn. I had been walking in the wrong direction for the entire hour. A cold wave of panic swept over me as I retraced my steps. It wasn't just that I was lost. It felt like something had gone wrong, as if the wrong turn had set something in motion. I tried to stay calm, muttering to myself, "It's okay, I just need to walk back and take the right path." But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. Something felt off. As I walked, I became more and more paranoid. I pulled out my headphones, trying to make as little noise as possible. Something about the night felt too quiet. I felt the need to move silently, almost as if something or someone might be listening. That's when I noticed something that sent a chill down my spine. 2 sets of footsteps. It wasn't my imagination. Every time I took a step, I could hear another set of footsteps behind me. The sound was synchronized, perfectly mirrored. At first, it was subtle, but it was real. It was there, clear as day, just half a beat behind mine. It wasn't a trick of the wind or the forest. This was something else. I started to count my steps, trying to test it. I walked deliberately, making sure the sound was just right, and every time the other footsteps followed in perfect sync. The timing was too exact, and the sound, the weight of it, was identical to mine. No human could replicate someone else's footsteps exactly, down to the rhythm, weight, and sound. My heart started racing, and I felt the panic surge through me. And then I heard it. A voice. Not a voice outside of me. No, this was a voice inside my head. Don't. I froze. I don't know why, but I knew, deep in my gut, that if I turned on that flashlight, I wouldn't survive. Move. The voice said again, and I did. I walked blindly, hands stretched out in front of me. But then it spoke again. Stop. I obeyed, no questions, no thought. I stopped moving, and then once more the voice returned, louder this time. Hide. My stomach dropped. Hide. Where? I couldn't see a thing. I was surrounded by blackness. The voice was insistent, almost frantic. Hide. And that's when I knew. Whatever had been chasing me wasn't done. It was close. I could feel it. I heard the footsteps again. It was circling me, slow, deliberate steps, like it was savoring this moment. And then, run. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a command. I ran, zigzagging through the forest, desperately trying to escape. But it was fast. Too fast. Every step it took ate the distance between us, like it was hunting me. Then, the unthinkable happened. I stopped behind a log, trying to catch my breath, hoping it would pass me by. The woods around me were eerily silent, and for a moment I thought I had escaped. But then I heard it. A scream. It was loud, so loud I thought my ears might burst. It echoed through the forest, and I realized it was behind me. But this time, the scream wasn't the only thing I heard. James, holy shit, James, is that you? It was Eric, my friend. My heart skipped a beat. Eric was here. I turned, ready to call out to him, but then I heard the voice again. Don't. Why? Why did it say that? I hesitated, and as I did, I realized why. It wasn't Eric. It had mimicked his voice, and then, in the distance, I saw it. It wasn't a Wendigo. It wasn't a skinwalker. This was something different. It was tall, unnaturally tall. Its limbs stretched down, nearly touching the ground. Its face was hidden, but I saw its hands. Long, twisted fingers, claws, sharp and jagged. It didn't move like anything human. It was hunting me. And this time it wasn't alone. I ran, and I ran until my legs couldn't carry me anymore. But when I stopped, the thing wasn't chasing me anymore. It had let me go. It had won. I had been its prey all along. The police found me, barely conscious. They said I'd been missing for a week, but I know the truth. The monster was never done with me. It wasn't just hunting me. It was playing with me. And I will never, ever go back into the woods again. My father asked me to play hide and seek with him for the first time in years. At first, I thought it was a joke. It had been so long since we had played that childish game, one I hadn't even thought about since I was a little girl. But when he insisted, something in his voice caught my attention. It wasn't just playful. There was an intensity to it, a seriousness that made me hesitate. It was strange, to say the least. I mean, I'm 18 now. The last time we had played hide and seek, I was probably no older than 7 or 8. I still remember the game well. I would hide behind the curtains, trying not to laugh as he searched for me. It was one of those innocent childhood memories that I had forgotten about over time. But when my dad, quiet, serious, and always so focused on work, asked if I wanted to play, I felt a wave of nostalgia. At first, I thought it was just him being goofy, trying to reconnect with his daughter after all these years. So, I agreed. What harm could it do? For a moment, it even felt comforting. My father was the kind of person who rarely showed excitement or enthusiasm, especially since I hit my teenage years. His focus was always on work, making sure I was excelling in school, and making sure everything around the house was in order. But this moment felt different. For a fleeting second, he wasn't the responsible, hard-working man I knew. He was just my dad. The same dad who used to play games with me when I was little. I covered my eyes with my hands and leaned against the living room wall, counting out loud. 1, 2, 3. It was silly, but something about it felt warm, familiar. I could hear my dad's soft chuckles as he scurried around the house, trying to find a good hiding spot. When I finally opened my eyes and started searching, I called out, with a playful smile, "Ready or not, here I am." I half expected him to have given up already, like he usually did after a few moments, but he was nowhere in sight. I wandered through the downstairs rooms, peeking around corners, looking behind the couch, and checking under the table. It didn't take long before I found him, crouched behind the long drapes in the dining room. His brown loafers were sticking out from beneath the curtain hem, and I couldn't help but grin. It was just like old times. I pulled back the curtain and sang "Found You" with all the excitement of a little girl. Dad's booming laughter filled the room, making my heart warm. He stood up and rubbed the back of his neck, still chuckling. "Guess I need to try harder, huh?" he said, still grinning. I laughed with him, feeling a sense of innocence I hadn't experienced in years. For a moment, he didn't seem so burdened by the responsibilities of life. He didn't look like a man caught in the grind of everyday existence. He looked like my dad again. It felt good, like we had stepped back in time. Didn't realize how much I had missed those simpler days. We switched roles, and this time it was my turn to hide while he counted. As I hid under the kitchen table, I could hear him counting down, his voice light-hearted and playful. I stifled giggles, feeling my stomach twist with happiness. This was fun, pure, simple fun. When he finally found me, I was grinning like a fool. We laughed together, and for a moment, It felt like everything was as it should be. That was the first night, just a few rounds of hide and seek, and when it was over, we both decided it was time to call it quits. It was getting late, and we were both breathless from laughing so much. As I headed upstairs to my room, Dad ruffled my hair, a smile still plastered on his face. "Thanks for playing," he said. "I really enjoyed it." I went to bed that night, feeling content. For the first time in a while, I felt like things were right. I had reconnected with my dad, seen a side of him I hadn't seen in years. I thought it was just a sweet, silly game. But little did I know, things would take a much darker turn. A couple of days later, after dinner, Dad asked if I wanted to play hide and seek again. I paused, surprised. We had just played a few days ago, and I wasn't sure why he would want to play again so soon. But when I looked at him, I saw the same excitement in his eyes, except this time, it seemed a little more intense. His enthusiasm was almost too much. Still, I agreed I didn't want to disappoint him, and honestly, the first game had been fun. But this time, something felt different. As soon as I started counting and Dad went to hide, I noticed something strange. He was hiding differently. At first, it seemed impressive. He had managed to squeeze himself into the dark cabinet under the kitchen sink, crammed between the pipes and cleaning supplies. I could barely believe how small of a space he had managed to wedge himself into. It was almost comical, but there was an odd sense of discomfort as I watched him uncoil his body from the cramped space. "Guess I need to try harder, huh?" He chuckled again, but this time there was something odd about the way he moved. He seemed a little too stiff, a little too deliberate. I didn't think much of it at the time. It was still just a game, right? But then, in the next round, things took another strange turn. I went into his bedroom, thinking he would be hiding in the closet, but instead, I heard a rustling sound from above me. I looked up, and there he was. Dad was lying flat on his stomach, on top of the wardrobe, wedged between the ceiling and an old suitcase. My heart skipped a beat. "Dad!" I gasped, my voice shaky. His eyes stared down at me from the shadows, unblinking. I felt a chill run through me. I had no idea how he had gotten up there so quickly or quietly. It didn't seem possible. His gaze never wavered, and as I called out, "I see you, Dad. Game's over," he slowly began to climb down, never breaking eye contact. The way he moved was unsettling, too slow, too deliberate, like something was off. Despite my growing unease, Dad insisted on one more round. I wanted to tell him I was done, that this was getting strange. But before I could say anything, he disappeared down the hallway to hide again. I didn't want to keep playing, but I couldn't exactly stop him either. This wasn't like the innocent game we had played when I was little. There was something about it now that made me feel like I was walking on thin ice. I began counting again, but my mind was racing. As the seconds ticked away, the anxiety in my chest only grew. The house felt too quiet, too still. I searched every room, downstairs, upstairs, and even outside, calling for him, but there was no sign of him anywhere. Then something caught my eye. The door to the linen closet was cracked open. It was never open. We always kept that closet shut. My heart started pounding. I walked cautiously toward it, calling out softly, "Dad." There was no response. I opened the door, and then I froze. There, in the darkness of the closet, was my father. His eyes stared at me from between stacks of towels and blankets. His body was wedged into the top shelf, as though he had been there for a while. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He just stared at me, his gaze wide and unblinking. I backed away, my heart racing. "Dad, what are you doing? Come out. You're going to hurt yourself," I said, trying to sound lighthearted. But there was nothing lighthearted about this. He didn't respond. He didn't even acknowledge my words. I reached out and touched his arm, and he flinched slightly, as if waking from a trance. His arm was warm, but his eyes, those eyes, still didn't seem like his. When he finally grinned, it wasn't the normal grin. It was slow, unsettling, as if it took him a moment to remember how to smile. He slowly untangled himself from the blankets and climbed down from the shelf. But the movement was strange, too slow. I stepped back, trying to shake off the growing sense of dread that was creeping up on me. "That was a really good hiding spot, Dad," I said, my voice shaky. He didn't respond right away. He just stood there, looking at me. His expression was blank, almost lost, but then it shifted. His smile returned, that same unnerving grin. "Your turn to hide," he said softly, but his tone was flat, like he was waiting for something. His voice had lost the warmth it had carried during the first game. My stomach dropped. Actually, I started to say, but before I could finish, he closed his eyes with one hand and began counting, picking up from where we left off. I stood frozen. I tried to speak, to tell him I didn't want to play anymore, but the words caught in my throat. He wasn't listening. His voice was steady, calm, almost too calm. 20, 19, 18. My heart pounded in my chest as I backed away, retreating into the bathroom. I locked the door behind me, my hands shaking. "I don't want to play anymore," I shouted through the door, my voice cracking. But he didn't respond. He kept counting, his numbers growing softer as they traveled down the hallway. I waited, heart in my throat, for what felt like an eternity. Then I heard his footsteps, slow, deliberate. He was coming, and I had no idea where he was or what was happening anymore. It wasn't the first time I had come home to a pool of freshly spilled blood. The strange thing was, it wasn't even the first time it had happened that month. But every time it happened, no matter how accustomed I had become to it, I felt a surge of dread in my chest, followed by a deep sense of resignation. I knew, in some twisted part of my mind, that I couldn't leave. not yet. The apartment was silent, as always. The only noise in the air was the soft hum of the fan spinning lazily overhead. As I walked in through the door, my eyes immediately fell on the pool of blood spread across the floor. The stark, bright red liquid shone unnaturally in the dim light of my living room, rippling in small, slow waves as the fan pushed the air around. I stood frozen for a moment, staring at it, my breath caught in my throat. This wasn't the first time. I had learned not to scream, not to shout, not to run. It wasn't real, I told myself. It never was. But every time it happened, it felt just a little more real than the last time. My hands trembled slightly, but I held my composure. Sighing deeply, I shut my eyes for a moment, hoping that when I opened them the blood would be gone. But it wasn't. I stepped forward, right into the middle of the pool. The cold liquid should have been sticky, but instead, it felt like I was walking on air. There was no splash, no splattering sound. Just an eerie, unnatural silence that filled the apartment. When I opened my eyes again, the pool of blood had disappeared. It was gone, just like it always was. I walked into the kitchen, the unsettling feeling creeping up my spine, and poured myself a cup of coffee. The silence felt suffocating, but I needed something to steady my nerves. The pool of blood was pretty low on the list of horrific things I'd seen in this apartment. It had become a regular occurrence, though I never fully got used to it. There were worse things, far worse things. I'd seen severed limbs, their jagged edges still dripping with blood, a mutilated face with hollow, gaping eye sockets filled with wriggling worms, and pieces of hair still attached to a scalp, like a twisted puzzle of skin and bone. The things I had seen in this apartment went beyond anything rational, beyond anything explainable. But I'd learned to cope, or at least I tried to. The first time I saw one of those images, I had screamed so loud my voice cracked. The face with the worms, the way the eyes seemed to follow me, even when they were nothing more than rotting, decaying sockets. I screamed, turned to run, and slammed into the wall. I had fallen backward, dazed and disoriented, only to look up and find the same face just inches from mine, staring directly at me. I screamed again and passed out. The doctor said I was hallucinating. Mood-dependent psychosis, they said. Stress, anxiety, and a life of constant pressure finally catching up to me. They said it was just my mind playing tricks on me, that it wasn't real. I saw a psychiatrist, took a handful of medications, and eventually began to lie about the things I saw. I lied to the doctors, I lied to myself, and I even lied to my friends. They wanted me to quit my job, to take time off. But I couldn't afford that. My rent was due, and I could not afford to miss even a single paycheck. This was my first real job, my first permanent job, and I wasn't going to let it slip away. The apartment was cheap, too cheap. In fact, it was too good of a deal to pass up. The rent was incredibly low, especially for a place in this area. with such a great location. My job was close and I saved money on transportation. It seemed like a perfect arrangement, or at least it had seemed that way at first. But now, as the images became more frequent, the nightmares more vivid, I wondered if the price I had paid for this place wasn't just in dollars. I could have moved out. I could have found somewhere else to stay. But the thought of it terrified me. It wasn't just about the rent, though that was certainly a huge factor. It was about the city. The idea of packing up and moving, of leaving behind my job, of losing everything I had worked for. I was barely holding on to my sanity, but I couldn't afford to let go of everything else. I could have moved out if I had the money, but the truth was, I didn't. I didn't have a single penny to spare. I was barely scraping by, surviving from paycheck to paycheck. Moving out wasn't an option, so I stayed. I tried to ignore the images, the blood, the severed limbs, the twisted faces. I ignored them as best I could. I told myself that they weren't real, that they couldn't hurt me. But there were times, especially when I was alone, when the dread was too much to bear. I remember the first time I saw the arm. It had just appeared out of nowhere. One minute I was sitting at my desk, typing away at some emails, and the next, there it was, hanging by my shoulder, draped over the back of my chair. A severed arm, with the skin still taut, the veins still visible, and the blood still fresh. I knew it wasn't real, but I could feel it. I could feel the weight of it, as if it were really there. At first I tried to ignore it. It was just another hallucination, right? But then I saw it twitch. The fingers moved, just lightly, but enough to make me freeze in terror. I couldn't focus on anything else. The arm moved again. The fingers twitched, just a little more this time. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead, my pulse racing. I closed my eyes and tried to steady my breath. This couldn't be happening. I couldn't stop myself. I turned my head, and I saw the face. It was behind me, just over my left shoulder, the same face I had seen so many times before. The eyes were empty, hollow sockets filled with wriggling worms. The skin was pale and decayed, stretched tight over the skull. The mouth hung open, frozen in a grotesque grin. I gasped, my breath catching in my throat, and then I heard it. "Leo," the voice whispered. I froze. The name, it hit me like a slap in the face. Leo, I had heard that name before somewhere. But where? I tried to think, to place it, but my mind was clouded with fear. It wasn't real. It couldn't be. But the words kept echoing in my head. "Leo," the voice had whispered. I don't know how long I sat there, frozen in my chair, the arm hanging beside me, the face looming over my shoulder. The air around me felt thick, suffocating. I could feel something crawling under my skin. I could feel it getting closer. Finally, I reached for my phone. My fingers trembled as I dialed the police. "Hello, I need help," I said, my voice shaking. "I'm being haunted. Someone, something is in my apartment. They promised to send someone immediately, but when they arrived, it was too late. They found me hysterically swatting at invisible things on my shoulder, screaming in terror. I had scratches all over my arms and legs, and I was covered in blood. But there was no blood, no severed limbs, no dismembered bodies, just the scratches, just the madness. The doctors said it was dissociation, that I had snapped, that I had attacked myself in some delusional state. They put me on mild sedatives and admitted me to the ward voluntarily. They said I needed to rest, but I couldn't rest. I couldn't sleep. I did some research. I called my landlady to ask about Leo. She cracked. Her voice trembled when she spoke his name. Leo had been her previous tenant's boyfriend, Sasha. Sasha had disappeared without a trace, leaving behind a text that she was moving for work. No goodbye, no warning, just an abrupt departure. And Leo was a nervous wreck, twitchy and intense. The landlady didn't trust him. I dug deeper. I found Leo's social media accounts. I created a fake account to get in touch with him, pretending to be someone else. I needed to know what had happened to Sasha. The more I searched, the closer I got to the truth. But Leo blocked me before I could get the answers I needed. I was discharged from the hospital after 3 days. I returned home, my nerves already on edge. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I braced myself for what I would find in my apartment. When I stepped through the door, I saw the shadow. It was standing behind the couch, watching me. I froze, my heart thudding in my chest. My foot splashed into something wet, and I slipped, falling hard onto the floor. Then Leo was standing over me. He dragged me into the bedroom and locked me in the closet. Leo wasn't the person I thought he was. He wasn't just a nervous, twitchy man. He was something else, something darker. And now he had me trapped in my own home. The images had stopped. No more blood, no more severed limbs, no more faces with worms. But I could still hear them, the scratching from beneath the bed, the whispers in the dark, the name, Sasha. And I knew I wasn't safe, not in this apartment, not anymore. But I couldn't leave, not yet. My father was a pretty easygoing person. He was always the fun dad who'd get my brother and I what we want from McDonald's, or take us to the arcade downtown over the weekend. We'd play catch in the backyard and go hiking in the green mountains that always stood as the backdrop of my childhood. He was a very outgoing person and active in our small town community. He coached my baseball team and sometimes stood in as an assistant scoutmaster for our local troop, Troop 191. I looked up to him a lot, more than maybe most, if I'm being honest with myself. Definitely more than my brother Sean. And now I look back at how my father was, especially during my most formative years, and I wonder how exactly he did it. He was the owner of a local security company. They'd set up cameras, alarms, the whole 9 yards. They also provided guards and watchman services. As far as I'm aware, these jobs were few and far between. It was fairly rare that any person or place really needed protection in Harmon. Our police force had a total of 5 members, and they were all part-timers other than the chief. What I didn't realize as a child was my father's company was farther reaching than Harmon's vague borders with the wilderness that surrounded it. They were contracted across the state, across New England sometimes. Again, most of this was alarm and camera security system work. Glorified electricians, essentially. But they were good at what they did. The watchman positions only became available every once in a blue moon, and that was only because my father rarely took those jobs. He didn't even have dedicated employees for the work, simply hired freelancers looking for a quick buck, essentially watching cameras in an office for 8 hours a night. Things started to change after the recession, however. People didn't have the money to splurge on expensive security systems. My father knew we would struggle if he didn't make changes, and soon what was the outlying limb of his business became its core. People needed work. More and more properties were being neglected and abandoned, and my father saw the opportunity to capitalize on both. I remember. He started coming home later than usual. Sometimes I didn't even see him until the next morning. Frankly, I was too young to really know what was going on. Sean might have been more aware, but I've never talked to him about it. As I grew up, I learned little bits and pieces of the night watchmen my father employed and the places they were hired to guard. He'd usually have some funny story to tell of the nightly reports he had come in. Sometimes there was nothing he'd tell me. However, when he got home, he'd simply drop his coat off in the mudroom and brush past my brother and I towards my mother with nothing but a shallow smile. I would watch my mother wrap her arms around him, and they'd quietly walk into the next room, away from our prying ears and my prying eyes. As I grew older, and all through high school, I was asked by many of my classmates if my dad could get them into one of the many properties which they surveyed. I'd always say no, of course. My father was very adamant about how dangerous those places were. He'd always say, "We aren't protecting the property from people. We are protecting people from the property." And any time anybody I knew would try to make it past the watchman, they would end up in my father's office by the morning. Despite usually having known them since they were 5, Harmon was a small town after all. He never hesitated to let the police teach them a lesson. That included my best friend, Devin, who lived 2 houses down from mine. Devin was probably one of the worst offenders, if I'm being honest. I never dared join him on any of his expeditions, but once he got a car, he was gone pretty much every single night. He was a smart kid, far more intelligent than the normal crowd that would break into any of the places my father's company surveyed. As a result, he got away with it. He wasn't there to trash the places, though. Just explore from what I was told. He'd show me pictures he took off his camera during lunch at school the next day. And, to be honest, I didn't really understand the appeal. They just seemed like abandoned buildings. Dirty, dusty, and probably dangerous. My father's words were still etched into my mind. Devin always defended his expeditions, however, despite the risks he took to achieve them. After high school, I honestly didn't know what to do with myself. I tried my hand at community college, but that didn't go far. Looked into the trades, but I'll be the first to admit I wasn't built for the blue-collar lifestyle. After 6 months or so, in the spring of 2018, my father offered me a job. "Hey, kiddo, can I come in?" he asked, knocking on my bedroom door. I swung around in my desk chair, pausing the game I was playing. "Yeah, of course," I replied with a bit of hesitation. I knew this conversation was coming. It had been months, and I'd been stuck working at the local urgent care behind the front desk, a carryover from my short interest in pursuing medicine. It wasn't the most glorious work, and sometimes it certainly wasn't pretty, but I was comfortable there. He sat down on the bed across from me and folded his hands, letting out that sigh that always came before your parents said something you didn't want to hear. "Adam, we need to talk about where you're going," he said plainly. "What do you mean, where I'm going?" "I mean where you're going, what you want to do with your life. College, career, anything at all. I hate seeing you just wasting your time here." He elaborated. "Dad, I have a steady job. I'm just figuring out what I want to do," I said as sternly as I could muster. It was a weak attempt. "You told me that back in the fall. It's May now, son. I gave you your time. Now I just can't watch you waste your time anymore," my father admitted. "What are you trying to say?" I asked with a bit of hesitance. "I want to give you an opportunity, since clearly you aren't pursuing one yourself." He finally spit out, "A job working for me." "Dad, no, I'm not." He quickly cut me off. "Adam, listen, it's better pay than you're getting. Hell, it's better pay than your brother is going to get once he finishes school. It can be the start of a career for you, or at the very least, you can start saving some real money for the future. And it's easy work. You'll have plenty of time to figure out what you want to do." He tried selling me, even repeating my own words. I shut my eyes for a moment and exhaled. "What's the job?" I asked begrudgingly, knowing this was less of a choice than he was making it out to be. "Night watchman, 5 days a week, 8 hours each day. I'll even let you pick your days off." "I thought you didn't want me going to those places. Aren't they dangerous after all?" I questioned, trying to use his words against him. He rolled his eyes. "I know what you're doing, son, and you're not a kid anymore. Plus, you'll be there legally, not trespassing like your friends. I'd be handpicking your assignments anyways. I won't have you going. If I'm going to take this job, I don't want any special treatment, Dad," I argued. "You offer me this job, I will go where you'd send any other watchman." He didn't respond for a moment, clearly not having a quick counter like he did for anything else I'd said up until that point. If that's what you want." He finally stumbled out, less assertive than before. His demeanor had completely changed in those few moments. Any confidence he conveyed had eroded severely. He looked at me with eyes that told me to fight the offer that he himself had just been arguing for, and I looked back at him with a new sense of cockiness, like I'd somehow beat him at his own game. I barely even thought about what I was doing. I knew my job was dead-end anyway, so I didn't see much stake in keeping it. Maybe this was a smart idea. My father had always had my best interest in mind. He wouldn't have ever offered this to me if he thought I couldn't handle it. But then again, I had thrown in a term that he did not offer. "I'll do it," I agreed simply, giving him a smile. He nodded silently, slowly rising from the bed and walking towards the door. "All right, I'll let you put your 2 weeks in. Then, I guess we'll get to work." "Looking forward to it, Dad," I told him. He bit his lip, looking like he was holding back something as he shut the door behind him. I didn't think twice about it, more interested in returning to my game than my father's minute facial expressions. In my own defense, I was 19, and I was stupid. After I'd finished up at the urgent care, my father started me out shadowing one of his other watchmen. His name was George, an older man in his early 60s. He had bushy gray hair with a matching mustache, and always wore a shirt and tie to the job, despite my father insisting to me that just a solid black shirt and pants would do fine. George took his job seriously, but he seemed happy to take me under his wing when my father explained the situation. I worked with George for 2 weeks, watching over the light bulb factory that had closed about 10 miles outside of Harmon. I remember people talking about it the first couple of years after it closed. Devin went a couple of times. But I guess the owners were tired of the place getting broken into, and my father was the man to call. George explained all the odds and ends of the job, when to interfere, when to make the call to the police, and how to use the camera system in the security trailer. Admittedly, upon first impressions, this might have been the easiest job of my life. The first week, nothing happened. And I mean nothing. George started letting me lead the perimeter walks, camera setups, and system checks, but other than that, we sat in that little office all night long. It took a bit for George to start talking, but once he did, I barely got a word in. It made the nights fly by, the man telling me his life story night after night, in almost chronological order. He had plenty of time after all. We weren't going anywhere. The second week, I had my first encounter. I had graduated from leading perimeter walks to soloing them. George assured me he was watching me the whole time, and we had walkies if anything went wrong. I wasn't too worried, though. The place had been dead all of the last week, and this week was shaping up to be no different. I rounded the corner of one of the old brick buildings into a courtyard before stopping dead in my tracks. Through the open window on my left, I heard the crackle of broken glass and the shifting of dust over the concrete floor inside. My heart dropped for a moment before I tried to regain my composure, pulling out my flashlight and shining it through the window. "Is somebody in there? This is security," I said as seriously as I could pull together. I waited for a moment, but got no response, not a sound. I let out a sigh, pulling out my radio. "Hey George, I think I've got someone inside Building 5. I dispatched. "You need a hand, kid?" he asked in a scratchy, gruff voice. I'm going to check it out myself," I'll let you know, all right? I decided, starting to walk towards the ajar door to the left of the window. Also, they've got to secure these doors. I've been saying that for months. All right, just watch yourself in there, Adam. Remember, these places can be dangerous. He advised. I can be there in 2 minutes if you need. Got it, will do. I answered quickly, clipping the radio back to my pocket, and pulling open the old metal door. I stepped up to the factory floor and found the space completely void of movement, void of sound, void of life. It was dark, dank, and water pooled where the ceiling leaked. Old equipment was still bolted to the floor and made the vast space feel like a maze with only my flashlight to guide me. I called out again, "This is security. If you're in here, I'm going to find you. This is private property, and you're trespassing," I said, repeating another one of George's lines he'd taught me. My words echoed off the distant walls of the space, making me feel even more isolated and small. Despite it being a pleasant 65 outside, inside it couldn't have been higher than 40. I shivered as I stepped further into the moonlit space, surveying every nook and cranny I could find. A shiver went up my spine as I crossed into the next room. It might as well have been a clone of the last, but it felt noticeably different, colder and heavier, even more decayed. I heard the sound of the debris swishing under my feet as I walked. Dust, chipped paint, and glass crunched as I inspected the room the same as the one before it. As I came to a stop and looked up at one of the massive pieces of machinery, I realized something was seriously wrong. While I was standing still, the sound of my footsteps kept going without me. And this wasn't an echo. That would have only lasted for a couple of seconds at most. This was clear. It was close, but slowly it sounded as if it were moving away. I stayed completely still, my heart pounding, as I listened to the sound step around the machines, onto the catwalk with its distant metal clank, and back down to the factory floor on the other side of the room. Then it came to a standstill, and the room returned to silence. I finally turned my head, my flashlight shaking in my hand as I crept around the corner, and there, standing at the far doorway into a long, dark hallway, was the silhouette of a man. He stood completely still, almost like a cardboard cutout. I shined my light towards him, but the beam seemed to almost dissipate before it made it across the room. Despite what George had told me time and time again about confrontations, I had to admit I was terrified. As I slowly walked closer, I had to keep reminding myself that it's just a person. "Sir, you can't be here. This is private property." I stumbled out, completely failing to deliver an intimidating tone. I got no response from the man. His silhouette stayed exactly in its pose, standing almost inhumanely straight up. Even as I approached him, my flashlight's warm glow still wouldn't reach him. I tried whacking the battery compartment to get a little more juice out of the light, but all it did was kill the light completely. I tried to stay calm as the silhouette watched me from the doorway. I frantically tried sliding out the batteries and reinserting them, my eyes dashing between my hands and the silhouette. Screwing the cover back on, I flicked on the light to find the figure was gone. Hey, stop fucking with me. We're gonna call the cops, and you're going to be charged with the trespassing, I warned in a futile state of panic. I turned around in circles, shining the light on any and every surface of the room. He hadn't gone far. He couldn't have. I didn't even hear his footsteps, and it had only been a moment. I finally rested my eyes back in front of me, and there, just as I'd left him, was the silhouette of the man. The flashlight did nothing to give the figure any details. He remained as dark and featureless as our surroundings. "What the fuck?" I whispered through quivering lips, dropping the light to my side finally. For the first time since I'd laid my eyes on him, the silhouette of the man moved. His arm stretched stiffly towards the open door like the muscles hadn't been used in years. His hand closed slowly into a fist, and he began to knock against the metal. At first they were nonsensical, slow, and the sound of the metal interrupted the immense silence that filled the space between us. I stood completely stunned, frozen, and unable to move. I thought to turn and run, but I feared what would happen if I lost eye contact with the figure. I could feel my heart pounding as the knocks started to become more consistent but still slow and intentional. The man let the sound play out before he'd go again, and the knocks became more aggressive and loud, almost unnaturally so. The sound seemed to bounce off the walls, surrounding me in a way that I couldn't explain. Then it came to a stop as quickly as it began. The arm lifted one last time and gently tapped the door in a familiar rhythm, the shave and a haircut. I watched it lower back to his side, just as jagged and stiff as it had raised. The figure's body then turned to face the open doorway to his right, and slowly, almost robotically, walked through the door and out of my view. I quickly started to breathe freely again, my breaths long and labored. Get your shit together, Adam. Get this guy and call George," I whispered to myself as I hesitantly stepped forward. My slow walk quickly grew to a run as my fear mounted. The worst-case scenarios and unknowns were building in my mind before I whipped around the corner the man had just stepped through. The room was small, with lines of shelves on either side and a small window towards the ceiling at the far end. Its safety glass was shattered, but the wire mesh kept it in place. The room was empty, nothing disturbed, no footprints, no other way out than through the doorway I'd watched since he'd walked through it. Any sense of calm I had disintegrated almost immediately. My eyes danced from wall to wall, hoping somehow I'd missed the full-grown human that should have been standing right in front of me. My mount fell agape as I stepped back slowly, almost dropping my flashlight with how much my hands were shaking. I grabbed the walkie from my pocket, admitting defeat as I was completely and unabashedly freaking out. "George, hey, it's Adam. I don't know what's going on, but this guy keeps disappearing, and he was banging on the walls trying to freak me out. Can you give me a hand finding him?" I asked, my voice a stuttering mess as I tried to downplay exactly what I'd been experiencing. The line stayed static, my mentor's familiar gruff voice absent where it should have been. "Hey, you there?" I asked again, after a few moments of static. And again, I heard nothing. "Good, George. George, pick up the damn walkie," I ordered, feeling the panic swelling inside me. But George never answered. I looked in either direction, trying to find the nearest exit. In the darkness, I couldn't make out anything, and I tried to retrace my steps towards the door I'd entered through. My walk was slow, cautious, as I moved around the dusty assembly lines and heavy machinery. As I passed a row of dirty, fogged windows, a rush of wind whistled through the building, sending the trees outside swaying and loose debris inside flying. Tree branches smacked against the windows as I passed, making me jump back in fright. I was more on edge than I'd ever been before, and if I'd heard a pin drop, I imagine my ears would have caught it. I continued past the windows, barely making it a few feet, before realizing that something wasn't right. While the wind had subsided, the branches kept hitting the windows. I swung my light around faster than I'd ever moved before, but it revealed nothing. The branches were completely still, yet the tapping continued. It was slow, purposeful, and I quickly understood its source wasn't something outside. I finally took off in a dash towards the next room, the soft taps of the window behind me turning into aggressive, loud bangs. The sounds bashed off of different materials, metal, brick, wood, anything that was available. I didn't dare look behind me as I tripped around the corner into the next room, but it followed me faster than I could run away. I could hear objects right beside me being pounded, smashed, and tossed, shaking the floor beneath my feet. I saw the moonlight shining through the open doorway in front of me as I kept running as fast as I possibly could, the vigorous, angry violence behind me gaining closer and closer to my ears. I heard loud bangs against the brick wall beside me, so strong that the plaster began to crack and chip. I swung around the handrail and felt something knock my leg out from under me, twisting my ankle as I tumbled down the stairs and out onto the crumbling concrete. I didn't move for a moment, almost hoping that I could somehow play dead. But that thought didn't last long. I quickly pushed myself to my feet, feeling the throbbing pain in my ankle as I hobbled away from the doorway. I barely made it 5 feet before collapsing to the ground again, starting to cry as I rolled onto my back. I picked my head up and looked back at the factory building. Silence surrounded me, as if nothing had happened. The leaves of the trees rustled quietly above, and that was all. In front of me, standing in the doorway I'd just come through, was the man, his black silhouette almost blending into the darkness behind him. I stared at him, frozen and helpless, like a deer in headlights. He simply stood for what felt like hours before moving his arm to the metal door, just as he had back inside. He balled his hand and gave the door 2 solid, slow knocks. Then he turned, and the black silhouette slipped back into the shadows. I walked in agonizing pain back to the security trailer, my entire leg throbbing in pain as I tried to move as quickly as I could. I kept trying to radio for George, but even outside, the walkie couldn't reach him. When the trailer came into view, something immediately seemed wrong. The lights inside were off. The flood lamp that was pointed down onto our security car had gone out as well. The place seemed lifeless and empty, just like the rest of the factory. "Shit," I muttered under my breath as I hobbled up the stairs and through the door. The room was cold, dark, and almost devoid of sound. George's usual early morning radio show had been replaced with white static, and in the office chair, hand grasping his chest, was George. He was heaving heavily, his eyes terrified as they rolled over to meet my own. I nearly fell again as I hurried to his side. "George, what the hell happened?" I'm calling 911. It's going to be okay. I promise." I insisted my months of working the front desk at an urgent care. Coming right back to me, I grabbed the phone off the desk and with trembling fingers dialed 911. I knew what I was looking at. I'd seen it more times than I'd like to admit. George was having a heart attack. The ambulance arrived within 10 minutes. Harmon Regional Hospital was only a few miles away, but it felt like a lifetime had passed as I tried to keep the man conscious. He never spoke, focusing all his efforts on breathing as I kept repeating over and over. We sat in the dark, with the sound of the radio static the only thing breaking the silence of the desolate property. Paramedics swung the door open, followed by the police, who quickly took over the scene. George was moved onto a stretcher, his almost limp body carried out of the room. The paramedics took us both to the hospital, the police giving me a ride in the back of their cruiser. "So, what happened to you, kid? You look like you just went through hell," the officer asked as we pulled out behind the ambulance. My face was slumped against the glass, watching the desolate factory slowly disappear behind the trees. I tripped down the stairs inside one of the buildings, twisted my ankle, and fell on the pavement, I said softly. "Thought you guys don't go inside unless there's suspicion of trespassing," he recalled. Yeah, I thought I heard something inside, but, didn't find anyone. Probably was just an animal." I tried to say, the words barely able to trickle out of my mouth. "Right. Guess you guys get a lot of that. Just so you know, if you think someone could be in there, we can investigate. I can have officers inside. No," I insisted, a renewed energy in my voice. I couldn't imagine that having any other soul enter that place, and I certainly wouldn't have it happen because of me. It was an animal. You don't need to have anyone go in there. Trust me." All right. If you say so, kid. If you say so." I had told my father the same thing when he and my mother made it to the hospital. My mom was just relieved I was all right. I looked worse than I really was, despite the cuts, bruises, and boot I got put on my foot for the next 2 weeks. My father looked at me differently, however. He was all smiles, glad I was safe, and said he was sorry I had to go through the whole ordeal. But there was something else in his eyes I couldn't quite place. Mannerisms that didn't quite match. I didn't really understand it, and at the moment I didn't really care to, but I do now. I was back on the job after the boot came off. My dad got one of his other guys to cover the factory with George out of commission. He lived through the heart attack, but never went back to work at that factory. He never told a soul what happened in the time he was alone either, and I did the same, not until right now. I worked for my father's company for 1.5 years, and there are many things that I never understood about what would happen on that job. Long after the knocker, as I started to call him. But whatever happened always stayed there, and I didn't. Now, I'm happy to say I don't have to work the nights. I don't even work in security. I live with my girlfriend Emma, 2 states away, and I've been happy. Money is good, relationship is good, life is good. My time working as a watchman doesn't even cross my mind. It's always been covered up by something better. But last night, I woke up in the middle of the night. Emma was still asleep, her dirty blonde hair having fallen over her face as she slept facing me. I couldn't help but smile. She always looked funny when she slept. I stretched a little under the covers as I adjusted and got ready to shut my eyes again. I let out a long breath before settling in again, rolling over and shutting my eyes. But just as quickly as they shut, they were quickly wide open again. I heard a knock on the glass, and then another, and then more. They were delicate, but purposeful, almost rhythmic. It lasted almost 10 minutes and ended in the same way, a shave and a haircut. I've spent the entire day today trying to figure out what caused it. Wasted my entire Sunday. I tore the house apart and checked every inch of the exterior, every bush, every tree, anything that could reproduce the knock. But it was a dead end at every turn. In the back of my mind, I knew I was simply delaying the answer I already knew was right. Emma thinks I'm going crazy trying to find the source of a knock that wasn't even loud enough to wake her up. But she doesn't understand, and I don't intend to explain it to her. Not yet, anyway. I'm afraid to go to sleep tonight. I don't know what will happen. Maybe nothing, maybe the same thing, maybe something worse. The unknown worries me, because the knocker isn't the worst thing I encountered on that job, and as much as he terrifies me, there are much bigger fish in the sea. If you've faced an urban legend hunt, felt a swamp terror, stole a lost child, or carry haunted guilt from a bayou nightmare, send your story to duskynights45@gmail.com. I post new tales every Monday through Friday. Subscribe if you're still out there. Keeps me chasing these shadows if I can. Don't follow whispers to the water's edge. Some things bite and they don't let go.